Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that someone you know, someone who seemed perfectly ordinary, who had plans, routines, and responsibilities, has suddenly disappeared without a trace. Days turn into weeks, weeks stretch into years, and then, against all odds, that person reappears. But they are not the same. They return with stories that sound unbelievable, accounts of being taken against their will, carried beyond the boundaries of Earth, and subjected to experiences so surreal that even describing them feels impossible. These aren't just tales whispered in the dark corners of the internet or passed along as campfire legends. These are accounts told by people who vanished for years and came back with one message: something took them. Welcome to Convincing Alien Abduction Stories Revealed by People Who Vanished for Years. What if reality is stranger than we've been taught to believe? What if those eerie lights reported in the sky, those unexplained gaps in memory, and those sudden reappearances aren't coincidences at all? Are these abductees fabricating elaborate lies, or are they glimpsing a hidden truth about our place in the cosmos? Could it be that humanity is not alone, and that some of us have already been unwilling participants in encounters far beyond our comprehension? In this journey, you'll hear the voices of those who vanished, the people whose lives were torn apart and forever changed by what they claim happened to them. Some returned with physical scars, others with fragmented memories, and all with haunting testimonies that defy conventional explanation. These stories are chilling, dramatic, and, most disturbingly, convincing. Stay with us, because what follows will force you to confront a terrifying possibility: that abductions are not fantasy, but reality. For as long as human beings have looked to the sky, we have wondered what might be out there. Ancient myths from nearly every culture describe strange beings descending from the heavens, sometimes benevolent, sometimes terrifying, but always powerful. These stories were told long before the invention of telescopes or spacecraft, long before the word alien entered our vocabulary, yet they carried an eerie resemblance to the modern accounts we now associate with extraterrestrial abductions. While today we frame them in the language of advanced technology, spacecraft, and interstellar visitors, the roots of these tales stretch back into humanity's earliest attempts to explain encounters with forces that seemed beyond the ordinary. This continuity of narrative shows that the fascination with beings from beyond is not new. It has always been a part of us, waiting to reappear in different forms depending on the era. The modern phenomenon of alien abductions, however, truly began in the mid-20th century, when the world was already grappling with rapid advances in science and technology. Rockets were piercing the atmosphere, satellites were circling the planet, and humanity was suddenly aware that space was not an unreachable dream but a new frontier. It was in this climate of both awe and anxiety that the first widely publicized alien abduction case emerged, the story of Betty and Barney Hill in 1961. Their account of being taken aboard a spacecraft, examined by strange beings, and then released back to Earth ignited a firestorm of attention. Newspapers carried their story, UFO enthusiasts dissected it, skeptics dismissed it, and psychologists debated its meaning. But regardless of where people stood, one thing was certain: abduction stories had stepped firmly into the public imagination. What made such stories so captivating? Part of the answer lies in the way they tap into universal fears and desires. On one hand, there is the deep-seated fear of losing control, of being powerless against an unknown force. Abductions mirror the primal terror of being captured in the night, removed from the safety of one's home, and subjected to strange and invasive experiences. On the other hand, there is a darker kind of allure. Abduction stories suggest that ordinary people might be chosen for extraordinary encounters, that they might have glimpsed a truth hidden from the rest of the world. For some, this transforms terror into a perverse form of significance. Being abducted means you are part of a larger cosmic narrative, whether you want it to be or not. Psychologists have often tried to explain these accounts through the lens of the human mind. Sleep paralysis, for example, is frequently cited as a cause. In that state, the brain awakens partially while the body remains immobilized, often accompanied by hallucinations of figures in the room, sensations of floating, or feelings of being watched. To someone unfamiliar with the phenomenon, it can feel utterly real, and in a culture saturated with UFO imagery, those visions may take the form of aliens. Hypnosis, too, has played a controversial role. Many abductees recovered their memories of being taken only after undergoing hypnotic regression, a process critics argue is highly susceptible to suggestion. To skeptics, abduction stories are a blend of cultural influence, psychological quirks, and the malleability of memory. Yet dismissing them so easily overlooks something crucial: the extraordinary consistency across accounts. People from different countries, speaking different languages, and unaware of each other's experiences often report strikingly similar details. Strange beings with large eyes, bright lights, examinations aboard a craft, and a sudden return with missing time. Folklorists argue that these consistencies reflect an evolving myth, a modern continuation of age-old stories of otherworldly kidnappings. In medieval Europe, there were tales of fairies abducting humans, spiriting them away to hidden realms, and returning them changed. In parts of Africa and Asia, spirits or gods were said to seize people, transporting them across worlds or through time. The parallels are undeniable. What we now call aliens might once have been framed as fairies, angels, or demons. The phenomenon shifts its costume, but the underlying story remains curiously the same. This cultural angle explains why abduction accounts resonate so deeply. They touch the archetypes buried in our collective imagination. They speak to the possibility that our world is permeable, that unseen forces might intrude into our lives at any moment. Whether one interprets them as literal truth or symbolic reflection, the effect is powerful. Entire communities have formed around abductees who seek understanding and validation. Support groups meet in church basements and community centers, where people share stories of lights in the sky, lost hours, and encounters that left them shaken. Books, films, and documentaries have amplified the fascination, ensuring that alien abductions remain not just fringe folklore but a fixture of modern culture. Still, there is a critical difference between the majority of abduction stories and the ones we are about to explore. Most well-known cases involve missing time, hours that cannot be accounted for, nights when someone awoke with strange marks on their body and a gap in their memory. These incidents are unsettling enough, yet they pale in comparison to the chilling accounts of people who didn't just vanish for hours but disappeared for years. Imagine the terror of a family searching desperately for a missing loved one, assuming the worst, only to have that person return after an inexplicable absence. Now picture that person insisting they had not been lost at all but taken, spirited away into a reality that does not fit our understanding of the world. It is here, at the boundary between folklore and the impossible, that the stories we will explore begin to take shape. They are not about fleeting lapses in memory or strange dreams. They are about lives interrupted, families left in anguish, and returns that brought more questions than answers. While psychologists can argue about sleep paralysis and cultural myths, these cases resist easy categorization. The people involved did not simply wake up in their beds with hazy recollections of being probed by strange beings. They were missing, documented by police reports, searched for by loved ones, and sometimes even declared dead. And then, against all expectations, they reappeared, carrying with them experiences that fit the abduction narrative yet exceeded it in scope and intensity. The gravity of such accounts forces us to ask, what happens when the missing time extends not into hours but into years? What happens when the folklore we think we understand suddenly collides with real-world disappearances that cannot be explained away so neatly? The stories ahead confront us with exactly that dilemma, pushing the boundaries of belief and challenging us to reconsider what we think is possible. When examining the unsettling accounts of alien abductions, particularly those involving individuals who vanished for years before mysteriously returning, it becomes important to first ground the discussion in the broader reality of human disappearances. Across the world, People go missing every day, and the numbers are staggering. In the United States alone, the National Crime Information Center receives hundreds of thousands of missing person reports each year. While the majority of these are resolved, many involving children who are found within hours, or adults who return after a brief period of absence, the sheer volume highlights how fragile the boundary between presence and absence truly is. Globally, millions are listed as missing at any given time, whether due to conflict, displacement, crime, or circumstances never explained. These statistics set the stage for understanding why some cases stand out so sharply, because amid the countless tragedies of ordinary disappearances, there are a select few that defy every conventional explanation. Most missing person cases fall into categories that, while heartbreaking, are at least comprehensible. Crimes such as kidnapping, homicide, or trafficking explain a significant number of cases. Accidents, too, play their part. Hikers lost in the wilderness, swimmers pulled under by currents, travelers caught in unforeseen circumstances. There are also those who vanish by choice, individuals overwhelmed by financial burdens, personal crises, or family tensions who decide to abandon their old lives and start anew elsewhere. Each of these scenarios is tragic in its own right, but they are scenarios the human mind can at least process. We can understand crime. We can imagine misfortune. We can even grasp the desire to escape. But then, there are the cases that leave investigators bewildered, families haunted, and communities shaken. Stories where a person steps outside to take a short walk and is never seen again, despite exhaustive searches. Instances where experienced outdoorsmen disappear in familiar terrain, as though the earth swallowed them whole. Accounts of pilots who radio their positions one moment and vanish from radar the next without distress calls or debris fields. These vanishings lack the clues that would make them fit into the established patterns. They are absences marked by silence, by missing explanations, and in some instances, by eerie circumstances that refuse to align with the ordinary. It is within this space of the unexplained that whispers of something more begin to emerge. Families and eyewitnesses sometimes report strange lights in the sky around the time of a disappearance. Search parties occasionally describe unusual aerial phenomena in areas where missing persons were last seen. A camper disappears in the woods, and fellow campers speak of hovering orbs that flickered silently above the treetops. A driver fails to arrive at their destination, and those who last saw them mention luminous shapes darting across the horizon. Alone, such sightings could be dismissed as misinterpretations, aircraft mistaken for something mysterious, atmospheric effects mistaken for movement. But taken together, they weave a pattern that suggests the possibility of forces beyond crime or accident at work. One striking feature of these inexplicable cases is the absence of typical forensic trails. In criminal investigations, there are usually hints, tire tracks, signs of struggle, surveillance footage, or digital footprints. In accidents, there may be wreckage, natural hazards, or weather reports that provide context. Yet, in a surprising number of vanishings that fuel theories of abduction, none of these expected signs are present. The environment remains undisturbed, as though the person simply blinked out of existence. Investigators tasked with finding rational answers are left frustrated, their reports often reduced to vague acknowledgments of missing persons last seen, without further clarity. For families, the lack of evidence makes grief even more difficult to process. How can one accept a loss when the very circumstances refuse to make sense? What further deepens the mystery are the cases where witnesses directly tie disappearances to aerial anomalies. In rural areas, where the night sky is less polluted by artificial light, sightings of unidentified flying objects are far more frequent. Entire communities have at times reported strange activity in the sky, coinciding with one or more individuals vanishing soon after. For example, local newspapers over the decades have carried stories of farmers or travelers who never returned, their last known moments linked by neighbors to inexplicable lights. Whether these were genuine extraterrestrial encounters, covert military operations, or collective psychological responses to stress, the accounts linger, too specific to dismiss outright and too extraordinary to comfortably accept. Skeptics often argue that such cases are exaggerations layered onto otherwise ordinary tragedies. A missing hiker becomes linked to strange lights because people are desperate for explanations, or because memory reshapes itself around rumor. Yet this perspective cannot erase the accounts where the timing is too precise, where a disappearance and an unexplained aerial event happen in tandem, reported by multiple independent witnesses. Human imagination is powerful, but it rarely produces such coordinated patterns. Even official reports from law enforcement occasionally record unusual lights or odd aerial activity in connection to missing persons, though these notes are usually left unexplored in final conclusions. The link between disappearances and UFO sightings gains further weight when one considers how long such stories have circulated. In the 19th century, before the word flying saucer had ever been coined, newspapers recorded incidents of people who vanished under circumstances described as supernatural. Some involved glowing apparitions in the sky, others strange noises or sudden blasts of light. Folklorists now look back at these stories and point out their similarity to modern UFO reports. This continuity across generations suggests that whatever people are experiencing, it is not entirely a product of contemporary media or pop culture. Instead, it appears to be part of a recurring human experience, reframed according to the language and symbols of the time. As technology advanced, so did the documentation of these events. By the late 20th century, with the spread of cameras and eventually smartphones, photographic and video evidence began to surface alongside disappearance stories. Those skeptics rightly point out that many such materials are inconclusive or easily manipulated. Some remain troublingly difficult to dismiss. Footage of bright objects hovering silently, vanishing suddenly, or performing maneuvers beyond known aircraft capabilities has been submitted in connection with missing person cases. While no piece of evidence has yet provided definitive proof, the accumulation of unexplained anomalies fuels the belief that some vanishings cannot be reduced to crime, accident, or voluntary escape. What makes this line of thought even more chilling is the emotional testimony of those left behind. Families often describe the vanishing of a loved one not as a gradual disappearance, but as a sudden rupture. They recall conversations cut short, routines interrupted mid-task, as though the person was snatched away in an instant. In a number of instances, multiple witnesses present at the scene have described a flash of light or a soundless glow coinciding with the moment the person was last seen. To them, these are not embellishments. They are memories etched in trauma. Such testimonies may not convince courts or official investigators, but they form a body of lived experience that cannot simply be erased. The sheer number of missing person cases worldwide means that skeptics can always argue probability. Out of millions, some will naturally remain unsolved, leaving room for speculation. But what complicates the picture is how certain unsolved cases align so neatly with abduction narratives. When individuals vanish without trace in tandem with reports of strange lights, when physical evidence is absent despite exhaustive searches, and when those who eventually return describe experiences consistent with abduction lore, it becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss the phenomenon outright. Instead, one is forced to at least consider the possibility that some disappearances belong to a category not yet fully recognized by science. And it is precisely these cases, the ones where absence becomes unexplainable, that prepare us for the stories to come. Because while many abduction accounts involve brief missing hours or fragmented memories, the ones we are about to confront are far more severe. They involve individuals who were not just missing for an evening or a night, but for months, even years. They vanished without a trace, leaving behind devastated families, baffled investigators, and communities forced to live with uncertainty. Then, sometimes as abruptly as they had gone, these individuals reappeared, alive, but carrying with them extraordinary stories of what had happened during their absence. This is where the lines between ordinary disappearances and something far stranger begin to blur. Statistics may account for the majority of missing persons, but numbers cannot explain the uncanny circumstances that surround a select few. Eyewitness reports of lights in the sky, sudden ruptures in daily routines, environments left undisturbed, and the sheer impossibility of extended absences all converge to form a picture that resists conventional answers. And as we move deeper into these accounts, it becomes clear that the phenomenon of vanishing without a trace is not merely a backdrop to alien abduction stories. It is the stage upon which the most convincing and unsettling narratives unfold. The phenomenon of vanishings tied to strange aerial anomalies becomes most chilling when attached to real names, documented events, and official investigations. Among the most discussed of these cases is that of Frederick Valentik, a young Australian pilot whose disappearance in 1978 remains one of aviation's most enduring mysteries. Unlike folklore or second-hand anecdotes, Valentik's story unfolded in full view of the authorities, leaving behind not only a missing person but also radio recordings, witness statements, and decades of speculation that refused to fade. His case sits at the uneasy crossroads of accident and abduction, its every detail scrutinized by skeptics and believers alike. Frederick Valentik was only 20 years old when he vanished. A relatively inexperienced pilot, he had accumulated about 150 flying hours, enough to be licensed, but not yet seasoned. Friends and colleagues described him as serious, determined, and deeply interested in aviation. He aspired to one day join Australia's Air Force, but, after facing setbacks in that pursuit, focused instead on civilian flight. Alongside his passion for flying, Valentik held a fascination for unidentified flying objects. He reportedly read widely on the subject, discussed UFOs with his peers, and expressed curiosity about whether humanity might truly be alone in the universe. Some critics later seized upon this interest to frame him as predisposed to misinterpret ordinary events, but others saw it as an eerie foreshadowing of what was to come. On the evening of October 21, 1978, Valentik rented a Cessna 182L, a small four-seat light aircraft, from Moorabbin Airport near Melbourne. His plan was a straightforward cross-country flight to King Island, located between the Australian mainland and Tasmania. The trip was routine, estimated to take little more than an hour, and Valentik's communications with air traffic control began without incident. The weather was reported as generally clear, though twilight was approaching. Nothing about the circumstances suggested trouble, until the final minutes of his journey. At 7:06 p.m., Valentik contacted Melbourne Air Traffic Control to report an unidentified aircraft flying near him. His voice, captured in a transmission that has since been replayed countless times, carried both confusion and a measure of controlled anxiety. He described the object as having 4 bright lights and appearing to move around him. When asked to clarify, he reported that the craft was playing some sort of game, moving at high speeds and orbiting above him. The controller pressed for details, but Valentik struggled to provide them, at one point stating that the object was not an aircraft. The conversation grew increasingly tense. Valentik reported the unidentified object approaching him repeatedly, as though tailing his small Cessna with deliberate intent. He described its movements as unlike any conventional aircraft, able to hover and maneuver with sudden acceleration. At one point, he even suggested the mysterious craft was orbiting above him, performing maneuvers no ordinary plane could match. Air traffic control continued to question him, trying to gather precise information, but Valentik's voice betrayed rising fear. Then came his final words. "It's not an aircraft. It's—" His sentence broke off mid-thought, followed by a metallic scraping sound lasting about 17 seconds. After that, silence. The radio link cut off, and Valentik was never heard from again. When Valentik failed to arrive at King Island, a full-scale search was launched. Aircraft and ships combed the waters of Bass Strait, scouring the area for any trace of wreckage. For days, authorities searched intensively, yet they found nothing. No debris, no oil slick, no sign of a crash. To this day, no part of his Cessna has ever been definitively recovered. The total absence of physical evidence only deepened the mystery, transforming what might have been dismissed as an accident into something far stranger. In the weeks following his disappearance, reports poured in from people who claimed to have seen unusual aerial phenomena on the night Valentik vanished. At least 20 witnesses described strange lights in the sky near the region of Bass Strait. Some said they observed a green, glowing light moving erratically. Others claimed to have seen a cigar-shaped craft hovering. One farmer even reported that he witnessed a bright light followed by a plane with a green glow shadowing it before both disappeared from view. While eyewitness testimony is notoriously fallible, the sheer number of independent accounts gave weight to the notion that Valentik had encountered something extraordinary. Investigators, however, pursued more conventional explanations. One possibility was that Valentik became disoriented during twilight, mistaking celestial phenomena such as Venus or the setting sun for a pursuing craft. Some experts suggested that he may have misidentified his own aircraft's lights reflecting on the water or clouds. Others theorized that he might have been flying upside down without realizing it, a situation that could cause confusion and lead him to perceive lights from the ground or sky as anomalous. Yet these theories did not fully account for the extended nature of his transmissions, the consistency of his descriptions, or the corroborating reports from other witnesses. Another line of speculation focused on Valentik's state of mind. Critics pointed out his fascination with UFOs, suggesting he may have been primed to interpret ambiguous visual stimuli as alien craft. Psychological stress, they argued, could have amplified his perceptions, transforming ordinary flight experiences into something sinister. Some even entertained the possibility that Valentik staged his own disappearance, though no evidence supported this claim, and his close relationships suggested he had no reason to abandon his life. Despite these theories, many remained convinced that Valentik encountered something genuinely unexplainable. His calm yet progressively distressed tone during the transmissions conveyed sincerity. His descriptions of the craft's movements, hovering, orbiting, darting in ways inconsistent with conventional aircraft, matched reports from countless UFO witnesses around the world. The sudden interruption of his final words, followed by the metallic sound, only fueled speculation of direct interference from whatever he had encountered. The lack of wreckage after such an intensive search added to the eerie possibility that his plane had been taken, not destroyed. In the years that followed, Valentik's case became a touchstone in discussions of UFOs and abductions. For believers, it was evidence that extraterrestrial encounters were not limited to fleeting lights in the sky, but could involve direct engagement with human technology and life. For skeptics, it remained a tragic accident magnified by the human tendency to weave myths around unresolved mysteries. Yet even skeptics could not ignore the peculiar details: the prolonged and coherent radio exchange, the corroborating witness reports, and the enduring absence of physical evidence. The Australian government officially listed the incident as missing, presumed fatal, concluding that Valentik likely crashed into the sea. But they never provided a definitive explanation, leaving the case open to interpretation. Researchers revisited the audio tapes repeatedly, analyzing every second of his transmissions. The strange metallic noise that followed his final words was studied intensively, with some claiming it was consistent with an engine failure, while others argued it sounded mechanical but external, unlike any known aircraft system malfunction. No consensus was reached. As decades passed, Valentik's disappearance remained one of the most debated aviation mysteries in the Southern Hemisphere. For UFO researchers, it stood as one of the strongest cases linking a disappearance directly to an extraterrestrial encounter. It was not just a story of lights in the sky, but of a man whose final words, recorded and preserved, described an object, not an aircraft, moments before he vanished. The immediacy of the evidence, the raw audio, the official transcripts, the documented search efforts, set it apart from folklore and rumor. Here was a case where the question could not be brushed aside, because the traces of reality anchored it too firmly. Families of missing persons often struggle with ambiguity, but Valentik's family faced a uniquely haunting burden. His father, Guido Valentik, publicly stated his belief that his son had been abducted by extraterrestrials, asserting that one day he would return. While some dismissed this as a grieving parent's hope, others saw it as consistent with reports of abductees who reappeared after long absences. That conviction, that Frederick was taken rather than lost, became part of the cultural fabric of the story, lending it an enduring sense of unease. The Valentik disappearance also influenced broader public discourse. UFO groups used it as a rallying point, highlighting the inadequacy of conventional explanations. Aviation experts continued to analyze the case in conferences and publications, often admitting its peculiarities even when advocating for mundane explanations. Documentaries revisited the story, dramatizing the final radio transmission to emphasize its chilling ambiguity. Each retelling ensured that Valentik's last words echoed through time, refusing to fade into obscurity. What makes his case so powerful is not only its unresolved nature, but the way it blurs the line between accident and encounter. If Valentik truly crashed, why has no wreckage ever been found in waters that have yielded remains from countless other accidents? If he misinterpreted celestial lights, why did so many independent witnesses report unusual aerial phenomena at the same time? If he fabricated the event, what could have driven him to abandon his life so convincingly, leaving no trace for decades? Each possible explanation answers one question but leaves many more hanging. This persistent ambiguity mirrors the larger phenomenon of vanishings tied to UFOs. Just as statistics on missing persons reveal gaps that cannot be fully explained by crime or accident, Valentik's case represents a microcosm of that broader puzzle. He did not vanish quietly in the night with no witnesses. He disappeared while communicating with official controllers, describing the event as it unfolded. His words, captured in real time, serve as testimony, a narrative frozen at the threshold of the unknown. Even today, more than 4 decades later, Valentik's story continues to inspire both fear and fascination. It stands as a reminder that not all vanishings can be neatly categorized. Some refuse to fit the patterns of ordinary life and death, instead pointing to possibilities that challenge our understanding of the world. Whether Frederick Valentik was lost to the sea, to misperception, or to something not of this earth, his case forces us to confront the same unsettling question that underlies all such mysteries. What happens when someone vanishes not just from our sight, but seemingly from reality itself? And it is here, in this liminal space between official explanation and inexplicable encounter, that we begin to see why stories like Valentik's hold such power. They are not merely tales of loss, but of confrontation with the unknown, where the boundaries of our reality tremble under the weight of unanswered questions. His disappearance serves as a bridge between the ordinary phenomenon of missing persons and the extraordinary possibility of abductions that defy every rational framework. In Valentik's story, the abstract becomes concrete, the folkloric becomes documented, and the terrifying possibility of alien involvement shifts from whispered speculation to something recorded in the annals of aviation history. The disappearance of Frederick Valentik in 1978 illustrated how a man could vanish mid-flight under circumstances so mysterious that speculation about extraterrestrial involvement became impossible to dismiss entirely. But Valentik's case, haunting though it was, lacked one element that makes another famous incident even more dramatic: the return of the missing individual. When someone vanishes and never comes back, ambiguity reigns. When they return, however, bearing a detailed story of what happened during the missing time, the entire mystery sharpens into something far more tangible. Few cases demonstrate this better than the disappearance and reappearance of Travis Walton, whose abduction account remains one of the most famous and hotly debated in history. In November of 1975, Travis Walton was a 22-year-old logger working with a crew in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest near Snowflake, Arizona. The crew, led by foreman Mike Rogers, had been contracted to clear trees in the rugged terrain. Logging was hard, physical labor, often involving long days in remote areas. The men on the crew knew each other well, bound by the camaraderie of shared work, but also by the stress of deadlines and financial pressures. Walton was, by all accounts, an ordinary young man, hard-working, friendly, and enjoying the freedom of life outdoors. What happened to him, however, would thrust him into the center of an international media storm. On the evening of November 5th, after finishing a day's work, Walton and 6 other crew members piled into Rogers's pickup truck and began the drive back to town. As dusk fell over the forest roads, they spotted something unusual in the distance. Hovering above a clearing was a bright, disc-shaped object glowing with an intense, golden light. At first, some of the men thought it might be a fire, but as they drew closer, the unmistakable outline of a craft took shape. It hovered silently, suspended in the air with a presence that seemed both impossible and undeniable. Curiosity, perhaps mixed with youthful boldness, compelled Walton to act. Against the frantic protests of his co-workers, he leapt from the truck and approached the strange object. The others called after him, shouting warnings, but Walton seemed transfixed. As he drew nearer, the craft emitted a sudden beam of brilliant blue-green light. Witnesses later described it as a powerful burst, like a bolt of energy. The beam struck Walton squarely, lifting him off the ground and throwing him several feet into the air. He crumpled to the forest floor, motionless. The crew panicked. Terrified by what they had just seen, they sped away in the truck, convinced Walton had been killed or that whatever force had struck him might come for them next. After driving some distance, however, guilt and fear gnawed at them. They stopped, argued, and finally agreed to turn back. When they returned to the clearing, the glowing craft was gone, and so was Travis Walton. What followed was a nightmare for the men. They raced into town and reported the incident to authorities, but their story sounded so incredible that law enforcement suspected foul play. To local investigators, it seemed far more likely that a fight or accident had occurred among the logging crew and that they were concocting a bizarre tale to cover up Walton's disappearance. Within hours, the story spread, and the men found themselves the targets of suspicion, ridicule, and fear. A massive search began. Law enforcement officers, volunteers, and even helicopters combed the forest for signs of Walton. Days passed without a trace. No body, no evidence, nothing to explain where he had gone. The more time elapsed, the more police leaned toward the theory that the crew had murdered Walton and disposed of his body. The men, facing accusations of homicide, insisted on the truth of their story. In an effort to prove their innocence, they agreed to take polygraph tests. The results shocked investigators. Of the 6 men tested, 5 passed, with results indicating they were telling the truth about what they had witnessed. The 6th test was deemed inconclusive due to nervousness, but examiners did not classify it as deception. Polygraph experts later noted that the probability of so many individuals independently fabricating such a consistent story and passing lie detector tests was extraordinarily low. While polygraphs are not infallible, the results cast serious doubt on the murder theory and lent weight to the men's insistence that something extraordinary had occurred. Meanwhile, the days stretched on. Walton's family endured the agony of uncertainty, torn between fearing the worst and clinging to hope. On the 5th day after his disappearance, hope finally returned, but in a way no one could have predicted. Late at night, Walton reappeared near a gas station in Heber, Arizona, dazed, disoriented, and in desperate need of help. He was thin, exhausted, and emotionally shaken, but very much alive. Walton's account of what had happened during those missing 5 days would quickly become the focus of worldwide attention. After being struck by the beam of light, he recalled a sensation of tremendous energy surging through him before losing consciousness. When he awoke, he found himself lying on a table in a sterile, metallic room. Hovering over him were beings unlike anything he had ever seen. Short, humanoid figures with large heads, pale skin, and enormous eyes. Their appearance matched the now iconic description of greys, though at the time such depictions had not yet saturated popular culture. Terrified, Walton leapt from the table, convinced he was in mortal danger. He described lashing out at the beings, shouting, and struggling to escape. Eventually, they retreated, and Walton stumbled through a series of corridors until he encountered other entities, taller, more human-like figures who wore helmets. Unlike the smaller beings, these figures did not alarm him as deeply, though they offered no explanation for his circumstances. They led him into a chamber where he was made to lie down once again. A mask was placed over his face, and he lost consciousness. The next thing Walton remembered was waking up near the gas station, watching the craft lift silently into the night sky before vanishing. 5 days had passed in the outside world, though to Walton, the experience felt shorter, fragmented, and dreamlike. His body showed signs of dehydration and weight loss consistent with prolonged absence, yet medical examinations revealed no major injuries. Blood tests indicated he had not consumed food for several days, aligning with his account of being held against his will. News of his return ignited a media frenzy. Newspapers and television networks seized on the story, portraying it as either the most credible alien abduction ever reported or as a sensational hoax. Walton underwent repeated interviews, retelling his experience in detail. Skeptics challenged his story, pointing to inconsistencies or suggesting that his knowledge of UFO lore had influenced his account. Supporters argued that his sincerity, combined with the corroborating testimony of his crew and the polygraph results, made it one of the strongest abduction cases on record. Medical examinations added further intrigue. Doctors who evaluated Walton shortly after his return found no evidence of physical trauma consistent with violence by his co-workers, undermining the murder theory further. They did, however, note unusual markers in his blood suggesting a prolonged lack of normal sustenance. Additionally, urine tests indicated a near absence of ketones, which would normally be elevated in someone who had gone without food for several days. Some researchers interpreted this as a sign that Walton may have received some form of sustenance not typical of earthly nutrition. Though speculative, such findings contributed to the aura of strangeness surrounding the case. The debate extended beyond medicine and into the realm of psychology. Some critics argued that Walton may have experienced a vivid hallucination or psychotic break, perhaps triggered by stress, fatigue, or exposure to environmental toxins. Yet this did not explain how 7 witnesses could corroborate the initial sighting of the craft, nor how Walton survived 5 days without leaving physical evidence of having been in the forest. Others suggested he staged the event for publicity or financial gain. Indeed, Walton later co-authored a book titled The Walton Experience, which was adapted into the 1993 film Fire in the Sky. While skeptics viewed this as proof of ulterior motives, supporters countered that he initially endured ridicule, suspicion, and trauma before ever receiving any financial benefit. The crew, for their part, remained steadfast. 4 decades after the incident, they consistently upheld their version of events, despite pressure from skeptics and investigators. Their refusal to change their stories, even when it might have been easier to admit fabrication, strengthened the case for authenticity in the eyes of many UFO researchers. The Walton case also gained traction because it mirrored elements of other abduction accounts while adding unique details. The description of small, gray-skinned beings matched patterns reported by others worldwide, even among people with no prior exposure to each other's stories. The involvement of taller, more human-like figures, echoed older folkloric traditions of encounters with otherworldly but humanoid entities. Walton's memory of medical-like procedures, his intense fear, and the fragmentary nature of his recollections all aligned with broader abduction narratives. Yet the context of his disappearance, the presence of multiple witnesses, the prolonged absence, the official search, and his dramatic reappearance, set it apart as unusually verifiable. Over time, the Walton case became one of the cornerstones of abduction lore. UFO organizations cited it as among the most convincing examples of alien intervention. Researchers analyzed it in books and conferences, dissecting every detail. Skeptics continued to challenge it, often pointing to the possibility of group collusion, misinterpretation, or self-delusion. Yet the case has endured for nearly half a century precisely because it resists closure. Like the voluntary disappearance, it exists in a liminal space, too extraordinary to accept outright, yet too well documented to dismiss entirely. What makes Walton's story even more compelling is its impact on culture. The Fire in the Sky film introduced his account to millions, dramatizing the abduction sequences with terrifying intensity. While the film altered some details for cinematic effect, it cemented the image of alien abduction in popular consciousness, influencing countless depictions in media afterward. Walton himself became both a reluctant celebrity and a symbol of resilience, continuing to speak publicly about his experience decades later. For believers, Walton's case is powerful precisely because it combines so many elements: multiple eyewitnesses, official investigation, polygraph tests, medical evaluations, and the actual return of the abductee. For skeptics, it remains troubling because no theory fully resolves all the anomalies. If Walton and the crew had fabricated the story, how did they sustain consistency under pressure, and why risk accusations of murder? If it was a hallucination, how did 7 men share it simultaneously? If it was an accident, why was no body found? And how did Walton survive 5 days with signs of deprivation but no evidence of natural exposure? In the end, the Walton incident endures because it embodies the very heart of the alien abduction debate. It is a story where ordinary explanations falter, where the return of the missing amplifies rather than resolves the mystery, and where the testimonies of those involved challenge the boundaries of belief. More than 4 decades later, Travis Walton's disappearance and reappearance continue to resonate, a reminder that some vanishings cannot be filed away neatly. And much like the Valentic case, it forces us to confront uncomfortable possibilities. When people vanish, we look first to the rational, the criminal, the accidental. But when they return with stories that defy our frameworks, stories corroborated by others, examined by experts, and scrutinized by the public, something far deeper is at play. Walton's case does not simply ask us whether alien abductions are real. It demands that we reckon with the fragility of our assumptions about reality itself. From the wide-open deserts of Arizona to the wind-whipped edges of northern England, the strange thread that ties together stories of disappearance and return is not just the missing person but the physical evidence left behind, or conspicuously not left behind. After the high-profile testimonies like Travis Walton's, we turn to a case where the body itself became the central enigma. Zygmunt Adamski, a 56-year-old Polish-born miner who vanished in June 1980 and was found days later under circumstances that refused easy explanation. On June 6, 1980, Adamski left his home in Tingley, near Wakefield, on a trivial errand. Some accounts say he went to buy potatoes and failed to return. 5 days later, on June 11th, his body was discovered at J. W. Parker's coal yard in Todmorden, some 20 to 30 miles from his house. He was found lying face down on top of a 10-foot pile of anthracite. Immediately, the scene raised questions. His suit appeared relatively clean despite the sooty surroundings. His shirt had been removed. His watch and wallet were missing and never recovered. There were burns on his head, neck, and shoulders that had been treated with a greasy yellow-green ointment that forensic reports at the time did not clearly identify. Reporters and investigators noted that the mound of coal showed little sign of having been disturbed earlier that day, prompting the unnerving possibility that the body had been deposited there rather than having climbed up or fallen into place by accident. These facts produced a range of competing hypotheses. A medical explanation, Adamski suffered a heart attack or disorientation and simply wandered off, was technically possible. The coroner did ultimately record heart failure as the cause of death. A human explanation, robbery or murder, also fit certain details. Missing valuables and the odd placement of the body could point to foul play or an attempt to move the corpse to conceal evidence. Some investigators proposed natural anomalies, such as ball lightning or a disorienting environmental event that might have led Adamski astray. Each of these possibilities answers some questions while leaving others glaringly open. If he died nearby, why was his body 20 miles from home? If he was murdered, who moved him and why was there no sign of a struggle? If natural causes explain the death, how to account for the treated burns and the clean suit? The Adamski mystery acquired a new, eerie dimension when P.C. Allen Godfrey, one of the first officers to arrive at the coal yard, later reported his own bizarre sighting. Months after finding Adamski's body, Godfrey claimed he had experienced an encounter with a low, diamond-shaped craft while investigating runaway cattle. Under hypnosis, he recalled a period of missing time, fragmented recollections of small humanoid figures, and a medical-style examination, memories he documented in sketches and later described publicly. Godfrey's subsequent account drew intense attention because it connected an official first responder directly to another inexplicable phenomenon in the same locale and year, suggesting the possibility of a shared or overlapping sequence of events rather than two wholly separate oddities. The coronial inquest and subsequent reporting added to the disquiet rather than resolving it. The coroner, James Turnbull, reportedly described the case as among the most puzzling of his career, a candor that allowed public imagination to run unchecked. Yard operators said the pile had not been moved during the morning, and that no one had been seen carrying a body to the top. If the body had been placed there, by human or other means, how had it been done without witnesses? Journalists and later researchers pointed to small but specific anomalies. Only a day's beard growth despite a 5-day disappearance, roughly cut hair, the unidentified ointment on burns, as stubborn facts that resisted tidy explanation. The physical oddities, once circulated by newspapers and later by documentaries and podcasts, took on a folkloric life. UFO investigators emphasized the burns and the unidentified ointment as physical traces that warranted attention beyond anecdote. Interviewers contrasted Adamski's last known routine, an ordinary man walking to the shops, with the extraordinary end, a man deposited in a coal yard far from home, bearing marks that some found reminiscent of other alleged abduction cases. Historians and journalists, meanwhile, pointed to the social context. Late 1970s Britain was marked by economic strain and a lively appetite for paranormal stories, and Todmorden's cluster of unexplained sightings fit into a larger pattern of local reports that included other lowland anomalies and strange aerial reports. Skeptical readings remain persuasive to many. The absence of any definitive toxicology report in the public domain, the missing wallet and watch, and reports of domestic tensions suggest human actors cannot be discounted. Hoax, staged crime scene, or interpersonal violence could all account for elements of the tableau. The reliability of hypnotic regression, used in part to probe Godfrey's memory, has itself been questioned by psychologists for its vulnerability to suggestion. Institutional pressure on officers to avoid sensationalizing their accounts, and the later admonitions about discussing the case publicly have also complicated the evidentiary picture. Yet, like other cases we have examined, Adamski's death resists neat classification because it sits at the intersection of hardened physical fact and interpretive vacuum. There was a body, there were burns and missing items, there was a coroner's verdict that did not address how the body came to rest where it had been found. The later UFO sighting by a named police constable transformed a local death into part of a wider catalogue of alleged lowland encounters, pulling a private tragedy into the realm of public mystery and grievance. What the Adamski case ultimately forces us to confront is the difficulty of concluding anything with absolute certainty in the face of incomplete records and competing narratives. It reminds us that evidence can be stubbornly partial, specific enough to provoke hypotheses, vague enough to support many. For some, the available details add up to a story of abduction or at least of an event at the edge of natural explanation. For others, they point to an unresolved human crime. Both reactions are the product of the same set of facts read through different lenses, one demanding forensic closure, the other attuned to pattern and anomaly. Detailed reports from contemporaneous news articles and later researchers amplified the peculiarities. Medical notes recorded burns on Adamski's neck, shoulders, and the back of his head. Those burns were reportedly treated with a greasy yellow-green ointment that contemporaneous toxicology could not easily identify. Colleagues at the coal yard insisted the anthracite mound had not been disturbed earlier that day, which led investigators to speculate about the possibility that the body had been placed there from above. Over the years, a wide spectrum of explanations collected around the core facts. Some researchers emphasized domestic motives and the possibility of foul play, missing personal effects, a body positioned awkwardly, and family tensions that could point toward an interpersonal crime. Others floated less conventional theories: ball lightning, secret experiments, or foreign involvement, ideas that were rarely supported by hard evidence but that spoke to the imagination. UFO investigators, in contrast, highlight the combination of the physical anomalies and the police officer's later encounter as the reason the case remains prominent in abduction literature. Institutionally, the case had consequences for local policing and for public trust. Officers who spoke about the events reported internal pressure and, according to some accounts, were discouraged from discussing their experiences. Freedom of information requests years later revealed gaps in public records and made clear how archival silences can complicate attempts to reach closure. For the community, the affair left a persistent residue of unease. A routine shopping trip ended in a mystery that spawned speculation, inquiry, and a continuing local subculture of research and storytelling. Whatever the truth, the death of Zygmunt Adamski remains emblematic of cases that straddle the boundary of two worlds, the forensic and the folkloric. It invites inquiry but resists final answers, and it reminds us that some disappearances change the questions we are allowed to ask as much as the answers we might hope to find. Whether one is inclined toward the extraterrestrial interpretation, toward an earthly crime, or toward a tragic accident, Adamski's case compels careful humility. Not every anomaly signifies the supernatural, but not every mystery can be folded neatly into the known categories either. The strange fate of Zygmunt Adamski showed us how even when a body is recovered, the questions around its condition can propel a case into the realm of the unexplainable. But there are other cases where people vanish only for hours, not days, and yet emerge so shaken, so fundamentally altered by what they say they experienced, that their testimony forces investigators and the public alike to grapple with the impossible. One of the most striking of these is the 1973 Pascagoula abduction, involving two men who insisted that what happened to them on a calm October night along the Pascagoula River was not only real but so disturbing that it haunted them for the rest of their lives. On the evening of October 11, 1973, Charles Hickson, a 42-year-old shipyard foreman, and his younger co-worker Calvin Parker, just 19 at the time, drove to a quiet spot on the river in Mississippi to relax and fish after a long day. Both men were ordinary, working-class Southerners with no history of fantastical claims or trouble with the law. They were sitting by the water when they noticed a strange buzzing or whirring sound. Looking up, they saw an oval-shaped craft with bright lights descending toward them. It was about 30 feet across, hovering silently except for the mechanical hum. What followed would leave them scarred. According to their accounts, a hatch opened and 3 entities emerged. They were not the stereotypical humanoid aliens of later reports. Instead, the beings were described as robot-like, with gray, wrinkled skin, claw-like pincers for hands, slit-like mouths, and carrot-shaped protrusions where ears or noses might be. Their legs appeared fused or immobile, and they floated rather than walked. Despite their bizarre appearance, the entities moved with purpose, grabbing the men with their pincers and levitating them toward the craft. Hickson recalled being paralyzed yet conscious as he was taken aboard. He described a glowing room, filled with an eerie light, where he was examined by a large, mechanical eye-like device that moved around him, scanning his body. He could not move, only watch as the cold, metallic environment enveloped him. Calvin Parker's memory was less clear, perhaps because of shock or because he shut down psychologically during the ordeal. He later admitted that, at the time, he fainted from fear and retained only fragmentary images. After what felt like an indeterminate span of time, both men were deposited back at the riverbank. The craft lifted off and disappeared into the night sky, leaving them shaken and terrified. The men sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. Hickson urged Parker that they needed to report the incident to the authorities, but Parker resisted. He feared ridicule, disbelief, or worse, that they would be accused of drunkenness or lying. Yet the depth of their shock convinced Hickson that they had no choice. They went to the local sheriff's office and told their story. The authorities listened with skepticism, assuming the men might be intoxicated or fabricating. To test their sincerity, deputies left Hickson and Parker alone in a room with a hidden tape recorder running. The officers expected to capture the two laughing about their hoax. Instead, the recording revealed two deeply disturbed men, whispering and praying, clearly shaken by fear. Hickson's voice trembled as he spoke of the beings, insisting no one would ever believe them. Parker sounded even more distressed, at times pleading that he didn't want to think about what had happened. When the deputies reviewed the tape, they realized the men's terror was genuine, whether or not the story itself was true. The sheriff's office also ordered polygraph tests, which Hickson passed. Parker, still too traumatized, did not complete his. The incident was quickly picked up by the press, and within days, the Pascagoula case became an international sensation. News outlets swarmed the small Mississippi town, and UFO researchers descended, eager to study what some were calling the most credible abduction case to date. For Charles Hickson, the aftermath was a strange mix of unwanted notoriety and reluctant advocacy. He gave interviews, appeared on talk shows, and consistently retold the same story without significant alteration for decades until his death in 2011. Though skeptics accused him of seeking fame, those close to him insisted he often expressed frustration that the incident had overshadowed his life, making him the subject of ridicule as much as belief. For Calvin Parker, the experience was far more debilitating. At just 19, the trauma of that night marked him deeply. He avoided the press, rarely spoke about the incident, and tried to live a quiet life away from the spotlight. For years, he maintained that he had been too terrified to recall the details fully, preferring silence to reliving the horror. Yet as time went on, and particularly in his later years, Parker began to share more. In 2018, shortly before his death in 2022, he published a book revealing details he had long withheld. One of the most striking revelations was Parker's admission of additional missing time episodes connected to the incident. He explained that in the years after Pascagoula, he experienced flashbacks and vivid dreams that seemed more like fragmented memories than imagination. Under hypnosis and through reflection, Parker recounted that his encounter may not have ended with that single night by the river. He suggested that he had been taken multiple times, experiencing further episodes of examination aboard strange craft. He spoke of being subjected to procedures that left him physically and emotionally drained, and of feeling that the beings had a long-term interest in him that stretched far beyond the 1973 abduction. These later disclosures added a new dimension to the case. The original story had already been one of the most dramatic and publicized abduction claims, but Parker's expanded testimony suggested a pattern consistent with reports from others who claimed repeated contact. For researchers, This continuity reinforced the plausibility of Parker's account. He had no desire for fame, had avoided publicity for decades, and only in later life, with nothing to gain, did he share more. To skeptics, however, the new claims raised doubts. Were they genuine memories, or the product of trauma, suggestion, or cultural reinforcement from decades of UFO media? What makes Pascagoula so enduring in the canon of abduction cases is not just the men's testimony, but the corroborating details that surrounded it. Multiple residents reported seeing unusual lights in the sky that night, lending support to Hickson and Parker's claims. The hidden tape recording, in which the men expressed raw fear when they believed no one was listening, remains one of the strongest pieces of supporting evidence for their sincerity. And the stark difference in how the two men coped, Hickson becoming the reluctant public face of the incident, Parker retreating into silence for most of his life, underscored the authenticity of their trauma. Psychologists and skeptics offered their own interpretations. Some suggested that Hickson and Parker experienced a shared hallucination triggered by stress, fatigue, or even substances, though no evidence of intoxication was found. Others proposed sleep paralysis or hypnagogic hallucinations, but these explanations faltered in the face of the men's clear wakefulness and corroborating reports of lights. Another skeptical theory held that the men fabricated the story for attention, but again, the hidden tape captured their profound distress in private moments, making deliberate hoax less convincing. Over the years, the Pascagoula abduction became one of the most frequently cited cases in UFO literature. It appeared in books, documentaries, and conferences, often highlighted for its unique details: the bizarre, robotic entities unlike the archetypal greys, the recorded evidence of trauma, and the divergent life paths of the two witnesses. Hickson remained steadfast until his death, never wavering from his account. Parker, after decades of silence, not only confirmed the original story but added layers that hinted at a broader phenomenon of repeated encounters. As with other cases we have examined, the Pascagoula incident lives in the space between the impossible and the undeniable. The evidence cannot prove alien involvement, yet it cannot be fully explained away either. The sincerity of the witnesses, the corroborating reports of strange lights, the consistency of Hickson's lifelong testimony, and Parker's late-life confessions all contribute to a mystery that endures half a century later. And like Valentik, Walton, and Adamski before, it challenges our assumptions about what it means to vanish, even briefly, and to return changed forever. Whether by hours, days, or years, those who re-emerge often carry with them memories, scars, and revelations that unsettle the boundary between the mundane and the extraordinary. The Pascagoula case not only demonstrated how two men could lose several hours to an inexplicable ordeal, but it also opened the door to a broader, recurring theme in abduction narratives: the phenomenon of missing time. Across cultures, continents, and decades, people who claim to have encountered something extraordinary often report gaps in memory, periods of time that simply vanish, erased from the conscious mind as though excised with surgical precision. Sometimes these gaps are measured in minutes or hours, but in other instances, abductees speak of days, months, or even years for which they can account neither for their whereabouts nor their experiences. The missing time phenomenon is one of the most haunting aspects of abduction lore because it fuses the psychological with the metaphysical, raising questions about the very nature of human consciousness and reality. Reports of missing time often follow a similar trajectory. Individuals are engaged in routine activities, driving, walking, fishing, or simply sitting in their homes, when they perceive something unusual, a flash of light, a strange sound, an odd object in the sky. Then, in what seems like an instant, they find themselves in a different location or back in the same spot, disoriented, with a clock showing that hours have passed. To them, the lapse feels like seconds. To the outside world, entire chunks of their day are gone. For some, the missing time is never recovered, leaving them with a sense of permanent loss. For others, memories seep back slowly, sometimes through dreams, sometimes under hypnosis, sometimes triggered by other encounters. Psychologists have offered several explanations for this unsettling phenomenon. Dissociation is one of the most frequently cited. Under extreme stress, the mind can split off awareness, creating blank spots in conscious memory. Trauma victims often describe this, as do individuals experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. In the context of alleged abductions, the overwhelming fear of encountering something otherworldly could plausibly induce such a response. Another possibility is temporal lobe epilepsy or other neurological events that distort perception of time. Hypnagogic states, occurring between wakefulness and sleep, can also produce vivid experiences coupled with lapses in awareness. Each of these explanations anchors the phenomenon firmly in the realm of the human brain, without recourse to external beings or forces. Yet metaphysical interpretations abound, particularly among those who take abductees' accounts at face value. From this perspective, missing time is not a failure of memory but evidence of intervention. The mind has been deliberately blocked, altered, or erased by those conducting the abduction. Many abductees describe being subjected to examinations, procedures, or communication with non-human intelligences during these blank periods, events they later recall in fragments. Hypnotic regression has often been used to probe these gaps, though the reliability of such techniques remains contested. Critics argue that hypnosis is prone to suggestion, but proponents insist that consistent patterns across unrelated abductees cannot be dismissed so easily. The Pascagoula case, revisited in later years through Calvin Parker's confessions, illustrates the way missing time can stretch beyond the initial encounter. Parker revealed that he had fragmented recollections of being taken again, of episodes that filled in blank spots across years of his life. These revelations are not unique. The literature on abductions is filled with testimonies of individuals who come to realize that what they thought were isolated incidents may have been part of a longer series of interactions, extending across significant portions of their lives. Missing years become part of the narrative, not just missing hours. Such cases strain credulity, yet they reveal an intriguing consistency. Abductees often return with subtle physical anomalies, disorientation, or shifts in personality that those close to them notice immediately. A husband might recall his wife leaving the house for an errand and not returning until hours later, dazed and confused, insisting only minutes had passed. A parent might report a child who wandered away for a short time but was later found far from where they should have been, with no memory of how they traveled there. In some of the most extreme instances, individuals vanish from their communities altogether, only to reappear years later with no memory of the intervening time, unable to explain where they have been. While such accounts blur into the wider category of missing persons, they resonate eerily with abduction themes, as though the same unseen mechanism is at work. The challenge is that missing time undermines the very foundations of verification. A crime can be reconstructed through physical evidence, a disappearance through records of movement, but time itself, once lost, cannot be measured. The only tools available are memory, testimony, and circumstantial evidence, each of which is vulnerable to distortion. This makes the missing time phenomenon both infuriating to skeptics and intoxicating to believers. For skeptics, it is too pliable, too reliant on fallible memory. For believers, it is precisely the pliability of memory that suggests deliberate interference. If something wanted to conceal its presence, erasing time itself would be the most efficient method. Metaphysical theories go further still, proposing that missing time may represent not just erased memory, but actual manipulation of temporal experience. Abductees often describe environments where the normal rules of time and space seem suspended. Hours pass in seconds, or seconds stretch into hours. Some researchers have speculated that encounters with advanced intelligences might involve technologies that alter human perception of time or move individuals between dimensions where time flows differently. While such theories remain highly speculative, they are bolstered by the sheer volume of accounts in which missing time is central. The cross-cultural recurrence of this theme, from Native American lore of time lost to the Star People to modern abductee support groups, suggests a phenomenon with deep psychological or experiential roots. What complicates the picture further is the emotional and spiritual aftermath. Those who report missing time often describe profound changes in outlook. Some become deeply fearful, constantly scanning the skies, plagued by anxiety that they might be taken again. Others experience a shift toward spirituality, claiming that the missing hours or days connected them to a greater cosmic order. A few even embrace their encounters as transformative, though such acceptance usually follows years of struggle. The polarity of responses, fear versus transcendence, mirrors the dual nature of missing time itself, hovering between trauma and revelation. In cases where years are unaccounted for, the mystery grows darker. Historical records tell of individuals who vanished only to resurface decades later, appearing younger than expected, disoriented, or altered in inexplicable ways. Folklore is rich with stories of people who entered fairy mounds or strange lights and returned to find that time had passed differently in the outside world. Modern abduction reports echo these older motifs, suggesting that missing time may not be a new phenomenon, but rather a contemporary framing of an ancient pattern. Ultimately, missing time sits at the core of why alien abduction stories captivate the public imagination. It speaks to our most intimate fears, the loss of control, the fragility of memory, the possibility that parts of our lives could simply vanish without our consent. Whether the explanation lies in neuropsychology, trauma, or encounters with something beyond human comprehension, the phenomenon demands attention because it blurs the line between subjective experience and external reality. And much like the stories of Valentik, Walton, Adamski, and Hickson and Parker, missing time unders the central theme that disappearance, whether for minutes, days, or years, is not merely an absence but a presence of something hidden, something intrusive, something that refuses to be named. It is not just about what is missing, but about what might have happened in the void that cannot be remembered, leaving behind only fragments, fear, and sometimes transformation. When the subject of alien abduction arises, the stories most people know involve short bursts of missing time, hours erased, a night that feels longer than it should, or a drive home interrupted by a bright light and later confusion. But there exists another layer of the phenomenon, one that unsettles even hardened skeptics because of its extremity. These are the cases not of hours lost but of years, entire stretches of a life seemingly stolen, only for the individual to reappear later in circumstances that defy all rational explanation. If the idea of losing an evening unsettles, the thought of vanishing from the world for years, and then returning, carries implications that border on the unimaginable. It is in these rare but chilling accounts that the line between folklore, psychological trauma, and true otherworldly interference becomes almost impossible to draw. The first thread often begins with a simple disappearance. Someone leaves home to complete an errand, embarks on a walk, or sets out on a short trip, and then they are simply gone. Local authorities search, families grieve, communities speculate. In many instances, people are presumed dead. Yet what transforms a missing persons case into something more enigmatic is not merely the absence, but the return. Those who do come back sometimes reappear in places far removed from where they vanished, showing no signs of aging proportional to the time they were gone, their clothing inexplicably intact, or their bodies marked by unusual scars and strange implants that were not present before. In other cases, the person's memory of the missing years is fractured, riddled with images of beings, craft, or procedures they cannot fully comprehend. Take, for example, the story of a man from rural Argentina in the late 1970s, known in UFO literature only as Pedro. He was a farmer who left home one morning to tend to his fields, a routine that should have taken hours. When he failed to return by nightfall, his family searched, then alerted local police. For weeks, search parties combed the surrounding land, but no trace was found. Months passed, and the family eventually resigned themselves to the likelihood of his death. And yet, 5 years later, Pedro was found wandering along a dirt road only a few miles from his original disappearance point. He looked no older than when he had vanished. His clothes were the same ones he had worn that day, clean and nearly new despite their age. Medical examinations showed signs of malnutrition, but also something stranger: small surgical-like scars along his back and behind his ears. When questioned, Pedro struggled to explain where he had been. He recalled lights, tall figures, and being inside an environment he could not describe in earthly terms. Beyond that, there was only confusion. Such stories challenge the very notion of continuity. How can a person disappear for half a decade and emerge almost unchanged, still wearing the clothes of their last known day? Communities confronted with such cases often experience a split reaction. Family members are torn between relief and unease. Some embrace the returned loved one wholeheartedly, while others find themselves unsettled by subtle differences: odd behaviors, a strange detachment, or a quiet insistence that the missing years are gone forever. In Pedro's case, his wife accepted him home, but neighbors whispered that he was not quite the same man. His once lively personality was subdued, and his gaze often seemed fixed on some point beyond the horizon, as if part of him had remained behind in the place he could not fully recall. A similar tale emerged from Eastern Europe in the 1980s. A young woman named Anya vanished from her village in Poland on her way back from school. Her disappearance became a local tragedy, sparking rumors of abduction, human trafficking, or accidental death. Nearly 7 years later, she appeared in a nearby town, wandering dazed through the streets. Though she should have been a woman in her 20s, she looked barely older than a teenager. When taken to a hospital, doctors discovered an unfamiliar metallic fragment embedded beneath the skin of her forearm. Efforts to remove it failed, as the fragment seemed to dissolve during surgery, leaving behind a peculiar scar that healed within days. When interviewed, Anya claimed she had been taken to the sky, kept in an environment where she neither aged nor felt hunger. She described tall, luminous beings who communicated without words, and procedures she could not understand. The police dismissed her account as delusion, but for her family, the relief of her return was complicated by the eerie nature of her story and the undeniable physical anomaly of the vanished implant. Stories like these do not exist in isolation. Across continents, cases emerge with hauntingly similar details, fueling both skepticism and belief. In the United States, particularly in the 1960s and 70s when UFO encounters were at a cultural peak, scattered accounts arose of individuals gone for long stretches only to reappear in uncanny ways. One such case involved a truck driver named Daniel, who disappeared along a Nevada highway. His abandoned truck was found idling on the side of the road, headlights still on, a cigarette burning in the ashtray. He was missing for 3 years, declared dead, until he reappeared at a truck stop in Arizona, wearing the same clothes he had last been seen in. He insisted only a few hours had passed. His watch showed the correct date from the day he vanished, and he carried a receipt dated that same day in his wallet. The dissonance was impossible to ignore. How could objects and clothing remain suspended in time while years slipped away for everyone else? For communities, these stories create fractures. In some cases, religious interpretations arise. The vanished and returned are said to have been taken by angels, spirits, or demons. In others, suspicion grows that the returned person is not who they claim to be but an impostor, or even a copy. Folklore echoes loudly here, with ancient tales of changelings, fairy abductions, and travelers who wandered into the realm of otherworldly beings only to return generations later. The alien abduction framework seems to be a modern evolution of these older motifs, clothed in the language of technology and extraterrestrial visitation rather than magic and fairies. Physical anomalies often intensify the mystery. Doctors examining returned abductees sometimes report scars that do not match any prior medical records. Small triangular marks, raised welts, or odd discolorations appear overnight. In rare cases, X-rays reveal metallic fragments of unknown composition, though skeptics argue these are mundane objects misinterpreted. One returned abductee in Brazil was found to have a circular scar around his navel, as though something had been inserted or removed. Another in Canada displayed what appeared to be a faint tattoo-like marking of geometric shapes on his thigh, which faded after several months. These details, trivial on their own, become chilling when paired with the testimony of vanished years and fractured memories. The social consequences for those who return can be devastating. Families that longed for closure often find themselves unable to reconcile the joy of reunion with the strangeness of what has happened. Marriages dissolve when the returned spouse seems emotionally distant or incapable of reintegrating into daily life. Children, grown older during the absence, may no longer recognize their parent as the person they once knew. Communities whisper, suspecting madness, deceit, or something darker. For the abductees themselves, the trauma is profound. Many express a sense of dislocation, as though they exist out of step with time. They grieve not only the years they lost, but also the sense of belonging that cannot be restored. Despite these hardships, the consistency of such accounts has kept researchers intrigued. Organizations that study abduction phenomena maintain archives filled with cases of long-term disappearance and return, noting the repeated motifs: sudden vanishing, unchanged clothing, absence of aging, surgical-like scars, and fragmented memories of otherworldly environments. Skeptics point out that such stories lack verifiable evidence and are often anecdotal, yet the weight of repetition across geography and culture cannot be dismissed easily. What binds these stories most tightly is the sense of incompleteness. None of the returned abductees can fully account for where they have been. Their narratives are riddled with gaps, contradictions, or hazy imagery that resists concrete description. Yet within the ambiguity lies their power. If the missing hours of the Pascagoula men are disturbing, then the missing years of Pedro, Anya, or Daniel strike at the core of human identity. They force us to consider the possibility that time itself may not be as linear and secure as we believe, and that somewhere beyond the fabric of daily life lurks an intelligence capable of rewriting the chronology of an individual's existence. These stories also invite reflection on the human need for closure. When someone disappears, the mind seeks explanation: crime, accident, voluntary flight. But when they return with stories that defy reason, the human instinct struggles. Communities want to believe in the ordinary, but the presence of scars, implants, or clothing that should have aged introduces doubt. Families want to embrace their loved ones, but subtle differences fuel suspicion. The abductees themselves want to move on, but their own fractured memories bind them to the mystery, leaving them suspended between two worlds, the familiar and the inexplicable. And so, the phenomenon of long-term disappearance and return occupies one of the darkest corners of abduction lore. It suggests not just interference, but ownership, that human beings can be removed, stored, altered, and replaced at will, with little regard for the continuity of their lives. It suggests a power that is not merely curious but controlling, capable of uprooting the most basic certainties of human existence. Whether interpreted as psychological delusion, folklore reborn, or evidence of extraterrestrial manipulation, these chilling stories remind us that the mystery of alien abduction is not confined to fleeting encounters. Sometimes it stretches across years, altering lives forever, leaving behind families, communities, and individuals who must wrestle with the impossible question of where those years went and what truly happened in the void of time. The stories of individuals vanishing for hours, days, or even years inevitably lead into another layer of speculation: the possibility of government involvement. While some abduction cases can be approached purely as personal or unexplained phenomena, the recurrence of similar patterns across decades and continents has prompted researchers and journalists alike to investigate whether institutions of power might be observing, manipulating, or even actively participating in these occurrences. The line between public skepticism and governmental secrecy has never been clearer than when reviewing the historical documentation surrounding UFOs, missing persons, and covert experiments. In the United States, Project Blue Book remains one of the most cited official investigations into unidentified flying objects. Initiated in 1952 and continuing until 1969, it represented a systematic attempt by the U.S. Air Force to collect, catalogue, and analyze UFO sightings. Tens of thousands of reports were compiled, ranging from mundane misidentifications of aircraft and atmospheric phenomena to incidents that remain unexplained to this day. Although the official conclusion stated that no UFOs posed a threat to national security and that there was no evidence of extraterrestrial visitation, declassified documents reveal the depth of scrutiny placed on cases that did not fit conventional explanations. Some of these reports included instances of missing persons in conjunction with unexplained aerial phenomena. While the records do not assert direct abduction by aliens, the overlap between disappearances and UFO sightings fueled public speculation that the government had access to information it was not sharing. The declassification of CIA and FBI documents in later decades further complicated the narrative. Internal memos and correspondence show that intelligence agencies were aware of both the rising public concern over UFOs and the potential national security implications of unexplained disappearances. Some documents suggest active monitoring of certain individuals, particularly those reporting abduction experiences, under the guise of ensuring public safety or maintaining social stability. While there is no publicly released proof that these agencies orchestrated abductions, the meticulous attention to anomalous reports has given rise to claims of cover-ups. Enthusiasts and researchers argue that the very existence of these records implies a level of concern beyond mere public relations, suggesting that authorities might have been withholding critical information from the population. A particularly sensitive area of speculation involves the possibility that missing persons were subjects of secret experimentation. In the mid-20th century, MKUltra, the CIA's infamous mind control program, became publicly known through congressional hearings in the 1970s. The project experimented with drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and psychological manipulation to influence human behavior. While MKUltra is well documented and undeniably disturbing in its scope, some researchers have hypothesized that its methods could have been applied to investigate or even fabricate abduction phenomena. Techniques like induced amnesia, memory suppression, and altered states of consciousness align eerily with the experiences reported by abductees who recall gaps of hours, days, or years. Some suggest that a portion of missing time accounts might not be extraterrestrial in origin at all, but rather the unintended, or perhaps deliberate, effects of clandestine government experimentation. These theories are bolstered by the testimony of former government employees, whistleblowers, and researchers who have pieced together connections between reported abductions and periods of intensive intelligence or military activity. There are documented cases of individuals disappearing near military installations, being found later with unexplained marks, or recounting vivid experiences that coincide with known experiments in psychological manipulation. While mainstream authorities deny any overlap between UFO investigations and covert human experimentation, the coincidences fuel speculation. To some, these links are the most plausible explanation for abduction phenomena. Humans operating advanced technology or experimental protocols, rather than extraterrestrials, could account for missing time, physical anomalies, and the consistency of certain abduction reports. The question of motive is unavoidable. Why would governments engage in such secretive observation or experimentation? The official narrative, focused on national security and the containment of potential threats, offers one answer. Understanding phenomena that defy current scientific explanation could provide strategic advantage, particularly during the height of the Cold War. Another explanation suggests psychological experimentation aimed at testing human resilience, memory, or susceptibility to suggestion. Some abductees' descriptions of sterile examination rooms, invasive procedures, and controlled environments resemble accounts of MKUltra experiments, raising the possibility that some missing time phenomena were deliberately engineered. Yet, the theory that extraterrestrial abduction and government oversight intersected introduces even deeper uncertainty. Perhaps what witnesses perceived as aliens were actually human agents employing technology or techniques beyond contemporary comprehension, blurring the line between human and non-human actors. Public distrust naturally flourished under these conditions. If government agencies were monitoring UFO sightings and missing person reports, withholding information for reasons of national security or research, then ordinary citizens would have little recourse to verify their experiences. Reports of abduction became not only personal mysteries but political ones, suggesting the possibility of systemic obfuscation. Families of the disappeared sometimes encountered obstruction or silence from authorities, further reinforcing the idea of cover-ups. For some abductees, skepticism from friends, relatives, and even investigators compounded trauma. Being labeled delusional or lying while facing unexplained phenomena created social isolation and doubt that mirrors the psychological effects of the abduction itself. While mainstream scientists remain cautious, the recurring overlap of missing person cases with known government programs remains provocative. Reports suggest that abductees are not randomly distributed. They often share proximity to research installations, military bases, or areas with prior UFO activity. Researchers compiling declassified records have noted that the pattern of disappearances is inconsistent with ordinary crime, accident, or voluntary absence. The convergence of these factors, unexplained disappearances, recurring physical anomalies, altered or missing memories, and proximity to sites of intelligence activity, creates an atmosphere in which the involvement of governmental or quasi-governmental actors cannot be ruled out outright. Yet, the debate is fraught with ambiguity. On one hand, the evidence supporting abduction as a purely extraterrestrial phenomenon is largely anecdotal, filtered through the subjective experiences of witnesses whose memories may be altered or incomplete. On the other hand, the documented existence of programs like MKUltra, coupled with the meticulous collection of UFO reports and the deliberate classification of sensitive documents, shows that institutions of power have long engaged in activities that intersect with the abduction narrative. Both realities coexist uneasily, and abductees find themselves at the intersection of human secrecy and potential otherworldly interference. In many ways, the specter of government involvement amplifies the psychological and cultural resonance of abduction cases. The knowledge or suspicion that unseen authorities might be monitoring, experimenting, or manipulating the population adds a layer of existential tension. It suggests that abductees' experiences are not merely isolated incidents, but part of a larger system that is both sophisticated and opaque. Memory lapses, physical anomalies, and the testimony of those returned after long absences are then not just mysteries. They are potential evidence of interaction with forces far beyond ordinary comprehension, whether alien, governmental, or some combination thereof. Historical records continue to surface, shedding partial light on the tangled relationship between UFO phenomena, missing persons, and intelligence agencies. While the government maintains official denials of direct involvement in alien abductions, declassified files reveal ongoing concern over unexplained aerial activity, unexplained disappearances, and the potential for mass public anxiety. Some documents detail protocols for interviewing witnesses, tracking sightings, and containing information. Others, released through Freedom of Information requests decades later, hint at internal discussions regarding the reliability of witness testimony, the need to assess possible technological espionage, and the ethical dilemmas of human experimentation. Ultimately, the intersection of alien abduction and government involvement underscores the difficulty of separating fact from conjecture. Project Blue Book, MKUltra, and declassified intelligence files reveal that the authorities have long engaged in secrecy and surveillance, sometimes on matters that are tangentially connected to abduction narratives. Whether or not these programs were directly responsible for the experiences of abductees remains contested. What is clear, however, is that the existence of these programs has fueled public suspicion, provided fertile ground for conspiracy theories, and created an environment in which missing persons, unexplained phenomena, and abduction claims are not merely curiosities. They are questions about the limits of human knowledge, the power of state institutions, and the possibility that the extraordinary might be closer than anyone admits. In connecting these strands, the accounts of vanished and returned individuals, the repeated motifs of missing time, the bizarre physical anomalies, and the documented secret programs, one sees the outlines of a complex web. It is a web in which human memory, extraterrestrial theory, and institutional secrecy overlap and sometimes collide. Whether abductees are encountering alien intelligences, clandestine human experiments, or some combination of both, the recurring patterns remain too consistent to ignore. This interplay between personal experience and governmental oversight ensures that abduction narratives retain their unsettling power. They are stories that challenge not only our understanding of the universe, but also our understanding of the institutions we trust to protect and inform us. By examining these intersections, researchers and observers gain insight into the multidimensional nature of abduction phenomena. It is no longer simply a question of "did this happen?" but of what mechanisms, human, extraterrestrial, or otherwise, allow for these events to occur. The presence of missing time reports, the testimony of returned abductees, and the evidence of government programs collectively suggest that whatever forces are at play operate at multiple levels: psychological, social, and institutional. It is precisely this multilayered complexity that makes alien abduction, and the possibility of government involvement, one of the most persistent and compelling mysteries of the modern era. Alien abduction accounts often sit at the intersection of belief, fear, and psychology, making them fertile ground for both scientific inquiry and skeptical critique. While some narratives present strikingly similar details across different continents and decades, psychologists have long attempted to explain these phenomena through naturalistic mechanisms. Among the most commonly proposed explanations are dissociation, trauma, and sleep paralysis, conditions that can profoundly alter a person's perception of reality, sometimes creating experiences that feel real while occurring entirely within the mind. Dissociation, for instance, is a psychological defense mechanism in which the mind separates from immediate experience, often triggered by extreme stress or fear. Individuals who experience dissociation may report gaps in memory, episodes of floating or detachment, or even encounters with entities that feel vividly real. In this light, a short-term abduction narrative could emerge from the mind's attempt to process overwhelming fear. Trauma, particularly when sudden or life-threatening, can also account for some reported abduction phenomena. Post-traumatic stress disorder can distort memory, making certain events appear larger, stranger, or more prolonged than they actually were. Individuals exposed to accidents, assaults, or other intense stressors may later recall elements of their experience in fragmented or fantastical ways. This could include perceiving bright lights, odd figures, or time lapses. Hypnagogic hallucinations. Hallucinations occurring during the transition between sleep and wakefulness further compound these effects. During these episodes, vivid imagery and tactile sensations can coexist with partial wakefulness, creating experiences that feel tangible and immediate. Sleep paralysis, in particular, has been widely studied among abductees. It immobilizes the body while consciousness remains intact, often accompanied by a feeling of pressure, presence in the room, or a sensation of levitation, elements remarkably consistent with reported abduction encounters. Skeptics seize upon these explanations to dismiss abduction claims entirely. From this perspective, reports of alien encounters, missing time, and physical anomalies are products of imagination, cognitive errors, or suggestive questioning, rather than evidence of extraterrestrial intervention. Many argue that cultural exposure to science fiction, UFO lore, and media depictions of aliens shapes the content of these hallucinations. In other words, individuals may subconsciously incorporate familiar motifs into their subconscious projections, generating coherent, fantastical narratives that seem credible even to the experiencer. Additionally, memory is notoriously malleable. Even sincere recollections can be altered over time, particularly when influenced by discussion, hypnosis, or media coverage. For skeptics, these factors provide a parsimonious explanation. There is no need to invoke aliens when the mind itself can produce such phenomena under specific psychological conditions. Yet the skeptical framework struggles to account for certain patterns that appear across multiple cases. For example, multi-witness vanishings, where entire groups report simultaneous abduction experiences, pose a particular challenge. The Walton case, involving Travis Walton and his logging crew, illustrates this vividly. Multiple witnesses provided corroborating accounts of his disappearance, the sighting of a strange craft, and his return after 5 days with a consistent narrative of abduction. While skeptics might propose collusion, fabrication, or shared psychological suggestion, the sheer number of consistent, independent testimonies complicates such explanations. Likewise, the Pascagoula abduction involved 2 individuals independently experiencing the same event, recording similar details in private settings, and displaying physiological signs of trauma afterward. In these instances, the explanatory power of dissociation, trauma, or sleep paralysis alone seems insufficient, particularly when combined with physical evidence like burns, scars, or unusual implants. Another limitation of psychological explanations arises when examining long-term disappearances. Individuals who vanish for years and later reappear often show continuity in appearance, clothing, or even physical markers that would not be expected if the experience were purely hallucinatory. While trauma and dissociation can explain altered perception during specific episodes, they do not account for the persistence of physical anomalies or the unexplainable preservation of the individual over prolonged periods. Skeptical interpretations sometimes suggest misidentification, deliberate deception, or false memory implantation. However, these hypotheses struggle against the consistency of multiple accounts, particularly when corroborated by independent witnesses or environmental evidence. Cultural and folkloric analysis offers additional nuance. Anthropologists note that stories of vanished individuals, whether framed as alien abductions, fairy abductions, or mystical disappearances, share strikingly similar motifs. The sudden removal from familiar surroundings, interaction with non-human entities, and eventual return, often with altered memory or physical markers. This cross-cultural consistency suggests either a deep-rooted psychological archetype or a shared experiential phenomenon that transcends individual imagination. Skeptics may argue for the former, but researchers intrigued by the latter note that such patterns cannot be explained solely by cultural diffusion, particularly when cases arise in regions isolated from popular UFO narratives. Nonetheless, it is important to acknowledge that psychological and skeptical perspectives are valuable for grounding investigation. They remind researchers to consider misperception, memory errors, social influence, and emotional stress when evaluating abduction claims. They also highlight the dangers of confirmation bias and the human propensity to construct narratives from incomplete data. Abduction experiences, like many extraordinary phenomena, occupy a liminal space in which subjective perception is central. Understanding the cognitive, emotional, and social factors at play helps contextualize these experiences without automatically dismissing them as impossible. The tension between skepticism and experiential accounts becomes even more pronounced when analyzing physical evidence. Scars, implants, or physiological anomalies observed in some abductees challenge purely psychological interpretations. Even if one accepts that memory can be flawed or hallucination convincing, the presence of tangible, measurable phenomena cannot be easily explained by dissociation alone. Here, the boundary between mind and matter is tested, raising fundamental questions about the reliability of our understanding of reality. The repeated observation of missing time, physical traces, and corroborating witness testimony suggests that a purely skeptical account leaves gaps, areas where conventional psychological theory cannot provide comprehensive explanations. Moreover, the persistence of abduction claims over decades and across cultural boundaries emphasizes that these experiences are not fleeting or random. Individuals who report abduction often display long-term changes in behavior, psychological state, and even spiritual perspective. Many struggle with anxiety, post-traumatic symptoms, or a heightened sensitivity to unusual phenomena. Skeptics may interpret these outcomes as secondary effects of stress, yet the recurrence and specificity of the experiences suggest that the phenomena themselves exert a profound influence on human consciousness. In other words, even if abduction experiences are not extraterrestrial in origin, they function as real events in the cognitive and emotional lives of those who experience them. In conclusion, psychological and skeptical perspectives provide critical frameworks for analyzing alien abduction claims. Dissociation, trauma, and sleep paralysis can account for many aspects of reported encounters, and cultural influences undoubtedly shape the content of experiences. However, these frameworks alone struggle to explain multi-witness vanishings, reappearances after prolonged absences, and physical evidence that accompanies certain cases. Abduction narratives remain compelling precisely because they occupy this liminal space between naturalistic explanation and inexplicable occurrence. They highlight the limits of our understanding, the malleability of human perception, and the possibility that some aspects of these experiences may transcend conventional psychological or skeptical models. Alien abduction narratives, particularly those involving long-term disappearances, have had a profound and enduring impact on culture, shaping the way societies understand the unknown and fueling both fascination and fear. Once confined to local folklore or anecdotal accounts, these stories entered the mainstream through media coverage, books, and later, cinema and television, transforming personal testimonies into collective phenomena. Newspapers in the 1970s and 1980s widely reported cases like Travis Walton's disappearance and return, emphasizing the dramatic elements, the sudden vanishing, the mysterious craft, and the tense period of uncertainty for families and communities. These real-life accounts captured the public imagination, and as the stories circulated, they began to influence creative interpretations, inspiring writers, filmmakers, and documentarians to explore the possibilities of alien encounters in increasingly elaborate ways. Movies and television played a particularly important role in dramatizing long-term abduction experiences. Films such as Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Fire in the Sky, the latter directly based on the Walton case, presented abductions as vivid, cinematic events, complete with luminous spacecraft, humanoid aliens, and extended missing time sequences. While dramatized for entertainment, these portrayals introduced millions of viewers to the concept of years or hours disappearing from a person's life, reinforcing the idea that abductions could involve both physical and psychological manipulation. Television documentaries and investigative specials further blurred the line between fact and dramatization, often combining interviews with abductees, expert commentary, and reenactments. This style of storytelling created an emotional resonance, making the experiences of returned individuals feel immediate and tangible to audiences, even those with no personal connection to the events. Books also contributed significantly to shaping public perception. Authors of both non-fiction and fiction explored abductee accounts, weaving together interviews, alleged government involvement, and analyses of physical evidence. Works such as Whitley Strieber's Communion gave voice to the personal, often terrifying experiences of people who vanished for extended periods, emphasizing not only the mystery of their disappearance, but also the psychological and social repercussions upon their return. These narratives, grounded in purportedly real experiences, lent credibility to the idea that long-term abductions were plausible, while simultaneously feeding the public appetite for conspiratorial explanations. Readers began to expect recurring motifs: missing time, implants, government secrecy, and encounters with beings who defied human understanding. The influence of media coverage and literature extended beyond individual entertainment, shaping broader conspiracy culture. Long-term abduction stories became embedded in a framework of distrust toward authorities, particularly when linked to declassified documents, Project Blue Book files, or MKUltra experiments. Communities familiar with these narratives began to interpret unexplained disappearances or UFO sightings through the lens established by popular media, creating a feedback loop in which real-life events and cultural representation reinforced one another. Skeptics often critique this loop, arguing that dramatization can contaminate testimony or create false memories, yet the cultural impact is undeniable. The stories became a shared language through which society grapples with the unknown, merging folklore, paranoia, and fascination. These narratives also influenced subcultures and support networks. Abductee support groups, both online and in person, proliferated during the 1980s and 1990s, creating spaces for individuals to share experiences, compare missing time phenomena, and validate one another's accounts. Media representations helped normalize these discussions, providing frameworks and terminology for people struggling to articulate experiences that defied conventional understanding. In turn, these communities contributed back to the cultural narrative, offering new stories, case studies, and personal testimonies that continued to shape public perception. The cycle of storytelling, media dissemination, and community reinforcement strengthened the visibility of long-term abduction narratives, making them enduring features of the UFO and paranormal landscape. Beyond entertainment and community, these stories exerted influence on imagination itself. They prompted discussions about the nature of time, consciousness, and human vulnerability to forces beyond comprehension. Children who grew up reading or watching dramatizations of abduction cases often internalized the possibility that reality could be disrupted, that people could vanish without warning, and that authorities might conceal knowledge of extraordinary events. These concepts became embedded in cultural archetypes: the lone witness, the missing loved one, the invisible presence, and the return marked by trauma or physical anomaly. They shaped literature, art, and even video games, demonstrating that long-term abduction stories had transcended their original context to influence broader cultural creativity. In sum, the cultural impact of long-term abduction stories is multifaceted. Through newspapers, films, books, television, and online communities, these narratives have become a part of the collective imagination, dramatized and amplified while remaining rooted in reported experiences. They have fueled fascination, inspired creative expression, and reinforced conspiracy-minded interpretations of authority and the unknown. Even skeptics acknowledge their power. Whether true, embellished, or psychological in origin, these stories capture a profound human curiosity about disappearance, the limits of perception, and the possibility that ordinary life can be interrupted by forces beyond comprehension. Long-term alien abduction stories carry implications that reach far beyond individual experiences, prompting questions about the nature of humanity's place in the cosmos and the potential purposes behind such phenomena. When abductees return after years or even hours with fragmented memories, unexplained physical anomalies, or knowledge they could not have acquired naturally, it challenges our understanding of what it means to be human. Some researchers and experiencers interpret these events as evidence of extraterrestrial experimentation, a deliberate observation or study of humans by advanced intelligences. If this is the case, the implications are staggering. Humanity might be subject to monitoring, selection, or manipulation by beings whose technology and understanding of life surpass our own. These ideas provoke both fear and wonder, as they suggest that the human species is part of a larger cosmic ecosystem in which our autonomy is, at least in some situations, secondary to forces beyond comprehension. This perspective raises a host of ethical and philosophical questions. If abductees are indeed being observed or studied, are these experiments benign, invasive, or even dangerous? The accounts of returned individuals often describe detailed examinations, interactions with entities whose motives are opaque, and periods of missing time that suggest manipulation of consciousness. From an ethical standpoint, these experiences challenge our notions of consent, free will, and personal sovereignty. The individuals subjected to such events often report profound changes in perception, psychology, or spiritual awareness, indicating that the impact is not merely physical but deeply cognitive and emotional. In this context, the phenomenon of abduction can be seen as both an intimate intervention and a reflection of broader questions about the rights of sentient beings and the responsibilities of more advanced intelligences toward less developed species. Not all interpretations are strictly extraterrestrial. Some spiritual frameworks and interdimensional theories posit that abductions are not limited to beings from other planets, but may involve entities from parallel dimensions, planes of consciousness, or other forms of existence beyond conventional perception. From this standpoint, the experience of abduction is less a study in physicality and more an encounter with forces that exist on levels of reality humans rarely perceive. Abductees who return with new insights, premonitions, or altered spiritual understanding suggest that these experiences may function as transformative encounters, prompting reflection on human purpose, collective consciousness, and the unseen architecture of the universe. Spiritual interpretations often emphasize the symbolic and personal meaning of these encounters, rather than focusing solely on the literal presence of extraterrestrials, framing abductions as part of a larger dialogue between humanity and forces beyond immediate comprehension. A recurring theme in both extraterrestrial and spiritual interpretations is the concept of being chosen. Abduction narratives frequently convey a sense that certain individuals are singled out for interaction, observation, or experimentation. This notion taps into a deep human fascination with selection, favor, and destiny. To be chosen is simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. It suggests significance beyond ordinary existence, yet also introduces vulnerability, as it entails exposure to forces that ordinary humans cannot control. In cultural and psychological terms, this fascination mirrors a broader desire to feel noticed, valued, or part of a narrative larger than oneself. It is a motif that resonates across folklore, religion, and mythology, echoing the age-old human quest to connect with the extraordinary. Abduction stories may serve as a modern iteration of these archetypes, framing contemporary anxieties and aspirations in the language of UFOs and extraterrestrial visitation. These stories also force humanity to confront its limitations. Encounters with advanced beings, whether technological, interdimensional, or spiritual, highlight the disparity between human knowledge and the capacities of forces operating at levels we cannot yet comprehend. They remind us that our perception of reality is limited, and that phenomena exist that may be partially observable but not fully explainable. This can provoke both fear and awe. Fear in acknowledging our vulnerability, or in recognizing the possibility of life, intelligence, and consciousness beyond the confines of Earth. The long-term nature of some abduction experiences, particularly those involving years of missing time, emphasizes the depth and continuity of these interventions, suggesting that humanity is engaged in a process that extends far beyond isolated events. Abductions also offer a mirror for human curiosity about the unknown. They encapsulate fundamental questions. Are we alone? Are we significant in the grand scheme of the universe? Do other intelligences exist that can interact with us directly? Whether one interprets abductions literally or symbolically, the stories stimulate reflection on what it means to be human and what responsibilities, if any, we might have in responding to encounters with the extraordinary. By presenting scenarios in which ordinary people are confronted with forces beyond their control, the narratives encourage contemplation of resilience, adaptation, and the nature of consciousness itself. Finally, the transformative aspect of abduction accounts should not be overlooked. Many individuals who return report shifts in perspective, greater awareness of interconnectedness, or heightened sensitivity to the mysteries of existence. This suggests that, regardless of origin, these experiences function as catalysts for personal and perhaps collective evolution. In a broader sense, humanity's engagement with these stories, through media, literature, or community discourse, reflects an ongoing negotiation with the unknown, a grappling with forces and possibilities that challenge the boundaries of everyday life. Whether interpreted as extraterrestrial experimentation, interdimensional encounters, or profound psychological phenomena, long-term abduction stories compel reflection on human significance, vulnerability, and potential. In sum, These accounts hint at the profound ways in which alien or unexplained interventions might shape human understanding. They prompt consideration of ethics, destiny, and cosmic context, suggesting that what might initially appear as random or terrifying experiences could carry broader implications for human evolution, spirituality, and our collective imagination. By contemplating the meaning behind abductions, we confront questions of agency, consciousness, and our place in a universe that may be far stranger and more interconnected than we have yet realized. The stories of individuals vanishing without explanation, sometimes for mere hours, but in other cases for years, occupy a uniquely unsettling place in the human imagination. From the moment of disappearance to the eventual return, when it occurs, these accounts confront us with a reality that defies both expectation and understanding. Each case, whether famous or obscure, follows a narrative that is at once intensely personal and profoundly universal. A person is removed from their familiar environment, families are plunged into anxiety and grief, communities speculate and search, and sometimes, against all odds, the individual returns with memories that challenge conventional understanding. This interplay between disappearance and return forms the backbone of what makes alien abduction stories so compelling and, indeed, so haunting. They are not merely tales of loss, but of disruption in the fundamental continuity of human experience, creating cognitive dissonance that persists long after the events themselves. When we reflect on the vanishing of individuals like Frederick Valentic, Travis Walton, or the lesser-known cases compiled over decades, a pattern emerges that is difficult to ignore. These disappearances are rarely fleeting. They often involve missing time that stretches beyond normal comprehension, with witnesses reappearing with little physical alteration yet carrying experiences that are extraordinary and, in many ways, incomprehensible. The accounts often include interactions with entities that defy known biology, technology that surpasses human capability, and physical evidence, implants, scars, or unexplained marks, that seems inconsistent with mundane explanation. Decades of research and speculation have attempted to contextualize these events, but in nearly every instance, the phenomena resist conventional categorization. Law enforcement reports, psychological studies, and government documents provide fragments of understanding, but none offer definitive closure, leaving a lingering unease that is as psychological as it is empirical. Part of what makes these narratives so haunting is the consistency of their motifs. Across continents, cultures, and decades, the stories share striking similarities: sudden disappearance, unaccountable missing time, encounters with non-human entities, detailed examination procedures, and eventual return with fragmented or altered memories. This repetition suggests a phenomenon that is neither purely cultural nor entirely random. It raises pressing questions about the mechanisms at work, whether extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or perhaps the result of psychological and governmental interactions that we do not yet fully comprehend. Even the most skeptical analyses, invoking dissociation, sleep paralysis, or memory malleability, struggle to reconcile multi-witness vanishings, physical evidence, and the extended temporal gaps observed in long-term abduction cases. In other words, these stories are resistant to easy explanation, defying both scientific and folkloric reduction. Equally significant is the social and emotional impact of these events. Families of the disappeared face prolonged grief punctuated by hope and uncertainty, only to be confronted by a return that may be psychologically disorienting or emotionally destabilizing. Communities respond with a mixture of empathy, suspicion, and fascination, while abductees themselves often carry enduring trauma. Many describe a sense of dislocation, of having lived outside the normal flow of time, and a permanent alteration in perspective. The experiences reshape their understanding of reality, sometimes heightening spiritual awareness, other times instilling fear or existential doubt. Society, in turn, is forced to grapple with the possibility that its collective understanding of the world, and of human autonomy, is incomplete. The cultural ramifications extend even further. These stories inspire books, movies, documentaries, and academic inquiry, embedding themselves in the public consciousness and influencing perceptions of the unknown. They intersect with conspiracy culture, governmental skepticism, and philosophical speculation, forming a matrix in which extraterrestrial and human agency may intersect. Popular culture dramatizes the events, but even in their fictionalized forms, the narratives retain a kernel of the uncanny, a reflection of the discomfort and awe generated by the real-life accounts. Audiences are captivated not only by the fear of the unknown but also by the tantalizing possibility that ordinary human existence is permeable to extraordinary forces, that the boundaries of space, time, and consciousness are not as fixed as we believe. One of the most chilling aspects of these stories lies in their endurance. Unlike many contemporary phenomena that fade as public attention shifts, long-term abduction narratives persist, sometimes growing more detailed over time as new testimonies, declassified documents, or investigative reports surface. The cases of people who vanished for years and returned relatively unchanged challenge the notion of linear time, continuity, and human perception. They suggest that human beings may be subject to forces, whether extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or clandestinely human, that operate on a scale and with a precision beyond current comprehension. For researchers, abductees, and even casual observers, this persistence enforces a sense of unresolved mystery. The more we investigate, the more gaps remain, leaving a space in which imagination, fear, and wonder converge. Another dimension of these haunting stories is the ethical and philosophical consideration of human agency. If extraterrestrial or unknown entities are capable of removing individuals from their environment for extended periods, examining them, and returning them with altered perception or physical modifications, then questions of autonomy, consent, and the nature of free will become unavoidable. Abductees' lives are irrevocably changed, whether through physical traces, psychological transformation, or the persistent burden of recounting experiences that defy rational explanation. These narratives force reflection on the fragility of human control over our own bodies and experiences, underscoring the vulnerability inherent in existence. This ethical unease compounds the terror and fascination generated by the abduction phenomenon, creating stories that resonate not only as mysteries of space and time, but also as challenges to moral and existential frameworks. Perhaps the ultimate source of unease lies in the limits of human understanding. Despite decades of investigation, thousands of testimonies, and the accumulation of data, we remain unable to definitively explain the mechanisms behind abductions, the motivations of the entities involved, or the patterns that emerge across different cases. The combination of personal experience, multi-witness corroboration, physical anomalies, and government documentation creates a mosaic that defies simple categorization. For humanity, this is profoundly disconcerting. It suggests that our perception of reality, our understanding of time, and even our confidence in the stability of human experience may be incomplete or provisional. In other words, if people can vanish for years and return with memories, scars, or implants that cannot be explained, then the certainty with which we navigate our lives may itself be an illusion. Moreover, these stories invite existential reflection on our place in the universe. The possibility that other intelligences, whether extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or technologically superior humans, might observe, manipulate, or interact with us challenges deeply held assumptions about autonomy, significance, and cosmic centrality. Abductions suggest a universe in which humans are neither wholly masters of their environment nor fully privy to the mechanisms of causality that govern existence. The chilling resonance of this idea is that, however much we believe in our knowledge of the world, there remain forces that elude understanding, that intervene in ways subtle or profound, and that may never be fully comprehended. In this light, the abduction narratives are more than stories. They are cautionary reflections on epistemological humility, on the need to recognize the limits of perception and comprehension in a universe that may be far stranger than we imagine. Finally, the enduring fascination with abduction narratives speaks to a fundamental aspect of human consciousness, our simultaneous fear and yearning for contact with the unknown. These stories unsettle because they suggest vulnerability, uncertainty, and the intervention of forces beyond our control. Yet they also captivate because they offer the tantalizing possibility of meaning, purpose, or connection with intelligences greater than ourselves. They provoke reflection on ethics, consciousness, mortality, and the boundaries of existence, creating a psychological and cultural space in which imagination, fear, and curiosity coexist. In conclusion, the persistence and richness of long-term alien abduction stories ensure that they remain haunting phenomena. They resist explanation, challenge assumptions about reality, and force contemplation of both individual and collective human vulnerability. They underscore the limitations of our knowledge and hint at dimensions of existence that may be fundamentally inaccessible or only partially comprehensible. Most haunting of all is the suggestion embedded in every narrative. If people can vanish for years and return with stories, marks, or memories that defy understanding, then the universe may be far larger, stranger, and more intricate than we have ever dared to believe. These stories endure, not only because of their dramatic content, but because they touch upon the deepest anxieties and aspirations of humanity, leaving us with the unsettling awareness that our grasp on reality is far more tenuous than we imagine.